trying to predict the future. And so the question that I've been asked to try to answer is, what's going to happen to Java in the future? And I'll tell you the answer now. I don't know. And neither do you, and neither does anybody else. But we can try to make some educated guesses based on some trends. Now, extrapolating trends is a dangerous business in the web world, right? And things change so fast, you can't just extrapolate trends. But if we have a whole bunch of different trends and we try to get a conglomerate feel, maybe this can give us some information. So right now Java is the most popular programming language in the world. Tomorrow it will be. Oh, next year will it be? I don't know. 10 years from now? I don't know. 20 years from now? Doubtful. Who will replace it? Who knows? But I think that we can get some information based on what some of the past trends have been. And what I'm going to try to do is save a few time for a few questions at the end. Okay, so I've tried to pick what I think are the most important trends that can help to predict what's going to happen to Java in terms of its its usage and popularity. I'm not trying to predict whether what languages are the best languages, or what languages are the right languages, or what languages are the good languages. I'm trying to predict how Java will be in its terms of its popularity and how mainstream it will be, which is a different question from what's the best or the most advanced. So one of the things I'm trying to look at is how has the features of the core Java Standard Edition, yes sir. How have the features of the core Standard Edition of Java progressed over time, and what does this say about where will Java be able to keep up with modern times, or will it be a COBOL-like dinosaur? Another issue is just kind of legal and political issues. If Java is in all these political fights and it doesn't have good management, that may not bode well for the future. Another issue is libraries. So when I first came to Java, I was a Lisp programmer. And the truth is, I didn't think Java was so great. And nowadays, Java is just about all right. I mean, a bunch of web applications and Ajax and jQuery on the client side, but on the server side, I mostly use Java. And I still don't think Java is so great. I don't think the core language is all that fantastic. I think Java is kind of the core language, is a mediocre plus language, but I like the libraries. And a lot of people feel that way. And so what's happening to the libraries in the Java world? Are they, flourishing? Are they proliferating? Are they stagnating? Are they fading? And what about devices? So Scott just talked about, go mobile or go home. So, does Java run on mobile devices? Does Java run on these Blu-ray devices? Does Java run on, smaller devices, Kindles, and desktop players, and so on? And then I think, most of all, the important thing to look at is some empirical data. Just what are the usage trends? Now, you can't predict these too far in the future, but I think that that's possibly the most important thing to look at, because we all have opinions about programming languages, and we love some and we hate some. But because you love it or I love it or you hate it or I hate it doesn't mean that it'll become mainstream. And we all know that the languages that succeed in the mainstream are not necessarily the best ones. And so the features of the language are not always the things that mean whether it'll succeed or not. And so I can look at some empirical trends. All right, so let me first look at the core features of the Java Standard Edition. How have they progressed over time? And so the numbers inside these circles are the Java major version numbers. And originally Java, the compiler was always 1.1, 1.2, 1.3, 1.4, 1.5, 1.6. But for kind of marketing reasons, they renamed some of the main Java versions. Instead of calling it 1.5, they called it Java 5. It's kind of funny because they renamed 1.2 Java 2, but there was no Java 3 or Java 4. It was Java 2 version 1.3 and 1.4, and then there was Java 5. There was never Java 3 or 4. So I'll just use the JDK numbers, which are consistently numbered. And the ones that I have circled in green are what I, in my very subjective opinion, consider major and important releases with lots of important features. And the ones circled in blue are the ones that I think were not such major features. Well, of course, the first one, there wasn't anything to compare it to then, and so of course it was major. So I think that Java, so when I started in Java, Java was in beta in 1995. You know, and I look back at it and it's like, how could I have used such a clunky old language? You know, but then I think about the other languages and how clunky they were back then too, and so I guess, you know, everything was clunky. And so Java 1.0, the first release of Java, was actually pretty crummy. You know, you wonder why did it succeed? And I think the reason it succeeded is because there was an app, a browser, and applets. You know, we've all forgotten about applets. You know, nobody does applets anymore. Who cares about applets? That's, you know, totally irrelevant in today's world. But I think that's a killer app that got Java started. And I don't think that Java became popular and mainstream at the beginning because it was so great. I think it became popular and mainstream at the beginning because it was pretty good, but it had an app that got everybody interested. And then the ball got rolling, and the guy who kicked the ball and got the snowball rolling kind of died, but the ball kept rolling. So Java 1.1 was an emergency fix for a language that was missing a lot of important features. So there wasn't JDBC, there wasn't Java Beans, there wasn't RMI, there weren't even inner classes. And me coming from a functional programming background, you know, and okay, it doesn't have to support functional programming. That was bad enough. But at least inner classes was a kind of a small step in the right direction for closures. And so, you know, I was very happy with Java 1.1. And then Java 1.2 was a major release, and it introduced collections, and swing became a standard part of the language. 1.3 and 1.4 I don't think were that major releases, but they were kind of continuous performance improvements and gradually increasing the sizes of the libraries. And so all the way up to here, I think there was continuous improvement. And then 1.5 was a very major release, in particular generics. That was the big thing that Java 5, it brought lots of other things too, but the main thing was generics. And so up to 2004, in my subjective opinion, Java was evolving pretty rapidly. And I think that was good. You don't want to evolve too rapidly because, you know, everything you learn becomes obsolete. Although Java is much better than most programming languages about insisting on being backwards compatible. Sometimes they insist too much. I wish they would just get rid of some of these deprecated features eventually. But up to 2004, I felt like Java was continuing to improve. And then from 2004 to about 2012, I call it the Great Stagnation. I think Java 1.6, you know, they should have called it Java 1.5a. It wasn't really that different. Okay, there's some performance improvements, that's true. And so the back-end compiler got faster, and for web applications in particular, it had some, you know, performance improvements. Okay, that's great. But for the ordinary programmer, you know, what's all that different from 1.5 to 1.6? You know, what's all that different from 1.6 to 1.7? Okay, you know, you've got, you know, try-catch with things that be auto-closable, and you can have, you know, ors in the tries, and okay, there's a few things, and you know, there's a few things in swing, but you know, 1.6 and 1.7 are, and so I was getting a little bit worried that, you know, Java is kind of not keeping up with the times, and it's kind of an old-fashioned language by today's standards. But I'm extremely happy with Java 1.8, which is in very stable beta now, and is slated to come out in the fall. And the most important thing, two things in Java 8 are Lambdas, which kind of look like functional programming. They aren't exactly. I'll give a few details today, but I have a talk on it on Friday. And streams, which are kind of like things that you do in jQuery. I have a very tiny example on that. And so Java 8 is a very major improvement, probably the most major change in all the major releases of Java. And so now I have hope again that Java is keeping up with the times. So I consider 2013 the resurgence in, and again, I'm talking about just a standard edition of Java, not the libraries, but the core language features, a resurgence in the kind of growth and capability of Java's, the core language of Java. Okay, just to give you a quick idea of Lambdas in Java 8. The first line here looks very much like what you would write in JavaScript. In JavaScript, you would actually take the array, and you would say dot sort, and you would put just exactly the same function, except you put the word function in front. And so it looks like you're supplying a function here. You're saying, oh, I'm passing in a function that takes 2 arguments and returns. It uses a single dash instead of the Scala-like equal sign here. I'm returning a function that takes 2 arguments that returns this value. But it's not real functional programming. What it's really doing is building an instance of an inner class that implements the interface that the second argument to arrays.sort expects. So this return type is not a function, but is that thing. In fact, under the hood, it's really doing that, the bottom thing. But it's very concise. It's very readable. It's kind of a step in the direction of functional programming. It's not full functional programming. For instance, this type, you can't tell by looking at this statement what its type is. You have to look at the underlying thing and look at what it expects. And I can pass the same Lambda statement into 2 different methods and get 2 different answers. And so it figures out, oh, well, this thing expects a comparator. And a comparator only has 1 method. So this must be and the method takes 2 strings. So you don't have to give the types. And this must be the method. It must be comparator. And it builds an instance of a comparator. And you put the same Lambda someplace else, it builds something of a different type. So it's not real functional programming, but it's a good step in the right direction. And it really meshes well with Java's existing infrastructure. So you can pass them as arguments to methods. If you don't have any, you only have 1 argument, you can leave the parentheses off. It does a bunch of type inferencing to figure out what the types are. And so it's not dynamically typed. It's still doing that under the hood. And I have some other examples you can look at in the slides. The other thing that goes with Java 8 is streams. Looks a lot like jQuery. So it's kind of like collections, but like jQuery, it returns the whole thing at the end. And so if I loop down a collection using the for each loop, maybe what I did in the first iteration changes what's going to happen in the second iteration. But with the filter or the map functions in streams in Java 8, they're all done independently, which means that the compiler can make it concurrent automatically. You don't have to use executor servers. You don't have to use runnable. You don't have to use thread. A compiler could automatically spin these off to different cores without the programmer having to say so. Plus, it's concise and convenient and familiar to jQuery programmers. Okay, so I think that in the language features, Java's doing moderately well. It's kind of somewhat keeping up with the mainstream in terms of being a modern programming language. It's not stagnating and falling too far. Everybody's good friend, Larry Ellison. And there are some people from Oracle in the audience here, so I'll be careful what I say. A little bit careful what I say, but not too careful what I say. And the question is, just because Larry Ellison is a CEO that is good for Oracle does not mean that he's a CEO that is good for Java. And what's good for Oracle as a company is not necessarily the same as good things that are good for Java as a language. And perhaps it's a bad thing that Java is now under the Oracle umbrella. James Gosling is gone. Can we survive without him? Maybe. Apache got up in arms, left the Java community process. So is Java community a misnomer now? Maybe. And Oracle is fighting with Google. The 3 biggest Java companies in the world are Oracle, Google, and IBM. Why is Oracle fighting with its friends instead of fighting with its enemies? So, Larry Ellison is high-flying, controversial figure. How many of you saw Iron Man 2? Larry Ellison has a cameo in Iron Man 2. And supposedly they claim that he paid a bunch of money to it. And so for 5 seconds, Larry Ellison walks by and Tony Stark says hi to him in Iron Man 2. And so there's some feeling that strong-willed Larry Ellison, Steve Jobs-like managers are not necessarily the thing that works best for open source languages that are supposed to be used across the community. Perhaps. And certainly, I think that James Gosling thought that. And so in an article in eWeek, he said that basically he felt that many of the technical decisions in the Java programming language were starting to be taken out of the hands of the technical experts and given to the managers. And that's a bad thing. I think we can all agree that that's a bad thing if it's true. Something that was greatly feared and widely predicted, but has not appeared to happen, is that Oracle would try to tie Java to its products and services instead of making it independent. That does not seem to have happened. There are a few small exceptions to that rule, but there's little evidence of this happening in any way, shape, or form with the Java language itself, which is a great relief. And many people thought they would and did not seem to happen. There's two small exceptions to that. One is Oracle ADF. But Oracle ADF has never been billed as part of Java or as an official part of Java EE in any way. And so how is Oracle ADF any different than Prime Faces or some other Spring or Hibernate? And so the fact that Oracle ADF is in fact more tied to Oracle products and services, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. Oracle made a third-party product. They didn't try to call it Java. They didn't make it part of Java. So that's okay. I'm okay with that. And if you want to use it, or if you're using Oracle products and services and Oracle ADF integrates with them nicely, fine. And so I personally don't think that that's, a secret behind the scenes end run of tying Java to Oracle. And it's true that the Oracle integrated development environment, JDeveloper, is more tied to Oracle products and services than Java people. But my answer is, who cares? Because nobody uses JDeveloper anyway. People use Eclipse, people use NetBeans, people use IntelliJ IDEA, and maybe people write things in Emacs, but nobody uses JDeveloper, and so I don't care. I'm exaggerating only slightly here. All right, so I'm not a manager, I'm not a marketing person, and so I can't analyze these things exactly, but I think that it's probably not such a good thing. The Larry Ellison style is probably not such a good thing for Java. All right, and then there's James Gosling. And my wife, who is Canadian, likes to remind me that James Gosling is Canadian, and I'm really using the Canadian programming language here. And he never said it in black and white, but it's extremely widely rumored, and I think there's reasonably good evidence to believe that the reason that James Gosling did not go to Oracle when Oracle bought Sun is that he didn't like Larry Ellison. But, I don't know if that's entirely true, but there's some, basically all he would say on record is, well, if I told you what I really think, I'd get in trouble. But I think there's some reason to think that, and so, Gosling is not really the inventor of Java. Gosling is the leader of the team that invented Java. It wasn't a one-person language, but he wrote the core JVM in the very early days, and so he's, rightfully called the father of Java. And so, can anybody replace James Gosling? Well, nobody can replace James Gosling, but Brian Getz, who is the Java Standard Edition program manager, has done a pretty darn good job. In fact, I would say that Java has improved more in the last 2 years with Brian Getz in charge than the previous 5 years with James Gosling in charge. Now, of course, Gosling was doing other things too, but what I'm trying to say is that, of course they want James Gosling, but, but they seem to be doing pretty well in terms of replacements. And Brian Getz, I think, has been an exceptionally outstanding replacement, and they seem to have brought in pretty strong technology people to back him up. All right, here's another problem, which is Apache, of all people, is supposed to be friends with Java. This is a marriage made in heaven, right? And what's this divorce going on now? So there was a thing called Apache Harmony. And this isn't even the biggest. It wasn't Apache Tomcat. It wasn't JBoss. It wasn't one of the biggest of the projects. Well, JBoss is not Apache, but same idea. There's Apache Harmony, which is not the biggest and mainstream product. But there was a big spat between Apache and Oracle about the Java community process and how well it protected the rights of organizations to make open source implementations of new specifications. In particular, the technology compatibility kit for Apache Harmony. There was a big dispute over that and whether there was supposed to be licensing fees. I don't really understand it all. But Apache felt like Oracle was not sufficiently protecting the rights of open source implementations. And a number of people had felt like the Java community process was being a little bit too dominated by Oracle. And that the feeling was the Java community process is supposed to be an even-handed thing. And okay, the core Java standard edition language is determined by Oracle. But all the libraries, serverless and JSP and JSF and EJB, are determined by these committees on which Oracle has no bigger voice than anybody else, supposedly. But they felt like they had too big of a voice. And Apache felt this. And so Apache said, okay, we quit. We quit the Java community process. And they still quit the Java community process. And so there's kind of an unresolved question. How community-ish is the Java community process? Are they really embracing enough of vendors from all around the spectrum? Or are they becoming a little too dominated by Oracle? And this is an open question. I don't know. But it's not a good sign. And also not a good sign is Oracle fighting with Google about Java in Android. I mean, the number one place Java is applied is web applications. The number two place that Java is applied is phones. And so you would think that Google and, maybe not Oracle, but Google and Java are natural friends. Google does tons and tons and tons and tons and tons of Java programming, not just for Android phones, but also for web applications. And so there was this fight, and the lawyers, put it in words that I can't understand, but I think the bottom line that everybody says is Google won. Oracle caved in on the patent fight and said, okay, Google is right, they can use it in Android, they weren't violating anything, and they don't owe us any money. And they capitulated almost entirely. And most people view that as a victory for Java. That Java will continue to be used in Android in the standard edition. It won't become a separate language called Guava or Gava or Googleava or something like that, and which is good for us as Java programmers because that's the whole point, is we don't want to learn 27 different languages. Because if we believe Malcolm Gladwell and it takes 10,000 hours to become an expert at something, 40 hours a week, every week of the year for 5 years, that's a long time to be an expert at a programming language. I can't be an expert at 7 of them. I can hardly even be an expert at 1 of them, or a medium expert. And so you don't want a splintering in the Java language, and that's a very important thing. And so it seems like probably that's not happening, but still, the fact that Oracle is fighting Google about Java. Okay, fine if they're fighting them about something else. Why are they fighting them about Java? They should have somehow, gotten together over a few beers behind the scenes, and Larry Ellison could have given Larry Page, one of his Lamborghinis and settled the whole thing, and not had such a big public fight about it. Okay, so in the legal and management issues, I think that the trend is unfavorable, not looking so good for Java. So there's the core language features. What does the actual language itself look like? There are this kind of legal and management things, which are kind of fuzzy, but still are important. And then there are not the language itself, but the libraries and the packages that go in the Java world. And I think that this is probably more important than the core features of the language for the mainstreamness, the widespread adoption of a language. And it seems like this has continued to flourish even during that period to the Java 1.5 to Java 1.8, where the core language didn't seem to evolve very rapidly, didn't get a lot of new features that were important, but the libraries and packages still continue to flourish there. And I think this is an extremely strong point for Java. And 3 particularly notable examples, I think, are: one is Android. So this is just an important library. There are more Android devices sold now than iPhone devices. It's the single most important, or in terms of numbers of devices, phone platform. And the libraries, Android libraries, are flourishing and being upgraded and improved very, very rapidly. And so there's yet another avenue for the Java programmer to apply Java. It's not a different language. It's not Objective-C. that's kind of a little bit like C++, but not really. It is Java. The libraries are not Swing, but it's Java. And you can use executive service, and you use the for each loop, and you use generic. Now, it's not Java 8. And it won't be Java 8 probably, for a long time. But at least it's Java. That's a good thing. Javaserver Faces, I think, is a library that has surprised a lot of people. So, a long time ago, there was serverless and JSP. And serverless and JSP were great and fine, but they're very low level. And in today's world, they're just too low level. It's almost like working in assembly language. And so we needed a framework. And so people came along with Struts. And way back when Struts first came out, okay, it was okay. It was better than what we had, so it was a step forward. But the Ruby on Rails people showed how clumsy and cumbersome Struts was. And then JSF, Javaserver Faces, came along. And in my opinion, JSF version 1 was a big dud. It was hardly, in my opinion, and this is of course very subjective, it was hardly any better than Struts. And Struts was fine in its day. It's just it kind of become long in the tooth and old in the beard, long in the beard and gray in the hair and all those kind of sorts of things. I was very disappointed with JSF 1. And I was just kind of shocked that it came out so much later than Struts, and it was hardly any better. And so when JSF 2 was in beta, I got email from the JSF 2 specification lead saying, Mark, I know you weren't a big fan of JSF 1. And I was like, oh, how did you know that? He said, but JSF 2 is in beta. We learned a lot of lessons from Ruby on Rails and JBoss. Now, it's not Ruby on Rails. It's not that nimble, but it's still a huge step in the right direction. And to my great amazement, I really liked it. And I think JSF 2 is a great step forward in Java web application frameworks. And it's kind of the standard choice for web application frameworks in Java now. And it has an API for defining component libraries. So there's been this kind of proliferation of third-party rich component libraries for JSF. They made a really good choice and they said, we don't know exactly what's going to happen with HTML5. We don't know which slider and which scroll bar and which number spinner and which auto completer and which dial and which gauge and which photo previewer and which pop-up dialog box in JavaScript is going to become the most popular. So we don't want to standardize that in JSF, because then if jQuery comes along and has a better one, nobody's going to want to use the JSF one. So instead they say, okay, we'll just make interfaces for the standard HTML elements, and we'll make an API that people can make rich components. I think that was a very wise choice, not to try to standardize it. And so there's rich faces, and there's prime faces, and there's ice faces, and there's Oracle ADF faces, and there's open faces, and there's Galileo, and there's a whole bunch of people trying to make these third-party component libraries, but the two that seem to be most popular are prime faces and rich faces. And then in the big data world, Hadoop is obviously a big thing. All right, so although the JVM in Android is not the same JVM you run on your desktop, and although the libraries are not all the same, obviously you don't run Swing because your phone is too small for a lot of those detailed things, it's regular Java code. I can take a jar file that I wrote in Java 6 for a desktop application, and I can put it on my Android device, and it runs. I don't change a line of code. It's really Java. It's not something close to Java. And so that's now the second most important area. And I think for a programming language to be mainstream, to have multiple different areas where it's being applied is a good thing. Because then there are lots of different communities of people that want to keep Java alive. And if you're a Java programmer, you have kind of more choices in your career. And I mentioned about JSF. And then, of course, big data is all the rage. And perhaps it's slightly more all the rage than it needs to be, but it is all the rage, and I think it's a very important thing. And where I live, there are a lot of organizations that deal with massive data sets. And Java's not the only player in this world. There's MongoDB, which is a C++ thing. Is that right? Is MongoDB based on C++? Yeah. But I think that probably the one that's most popular is Hadoop, which is based on Java. And Hadoop is really an open source implementation of the Google file system. But then they've built all these kind of extra libraries on top of it. And I think this is a very, very important area. And the fact that the single most popular library for dealing with big data is in Java is a good thing for Java. It's not in C#, it's not in Scala or Ruby, or it could be. And there are kind of libraries, but core Hadoop is in Java. Okay, and just to give you a picture of the growth of Hadoop. So one of the things I'm going to cite a lot in the remaining portion of this talk is a site called Indeed.com. Whoops. So Indeed.com is not really a job site. It's a meta job site. So it samples data from Monster.com and Dice.com and Yahoo Hot Jobs and I don't know what other job sites, a whole bunch of job sites. But one of the cool things that it has is a graph that will show you job postings in the last 5 years that contain this word in either the subject line or the keywords. It's just a rough measure. Maybe there's another word. Hadoop means something else. And Indeed.com is not a computer job site. It has jobs for teachers and custodians and truck drivers, and it's just, a meta job site. But it gives the trends, I think, are useful. And so the rough trends are probably give you some information. And JPA and EJB3 are kind of dwarfed by the number of job postings that mention Hadoop in them somewhere nowadays. And so Hadoop is an important library. And I think I put Hadoop and MongoDB next to each other. They were pretty close, but I think maybe 20% higher or 30% higher for Hadoop. Okay, so I would consider the libraries and applications that you can use Java in to be a positive feature. Something that over the past few years has been a growth area and that portends well for the future of Java. What about devices? All right, well, Java is the big winner here. You can run Java on your desktop. You can run Java on your Android, but not your iOS tablet. You can run Java on your Android or BlackBerry, but not iOS phone. You can run Java. The Kindle is written in Java. Blu-ray players are all Java. Every Blu-ray player in the world is Java, as was mentioned in the last talk. And there's cable TV set-top boxes and game players and 8 bazillion things that do Java. And that kind of seems cool until you think about, well, how many people really program those? Okay, I have a Kindle, but I've never written a Kindle app. I have a Blu-ray player, but I've never written a Blu-ray player app. I have an Android, and I have written Android apps. I've got a computer, and I have written computer apps. And so the fact that there's 8 bazillion applications, devices, and that Java really is excelling as the language that is being used for a lot of these small devices, it certainly can't be a bad thing, but is it really all that important? I don't know. I think we have to wait and see what happens with all these devices. But nevertheless, I think the trend is positive that Java is moving into a lot of these small devices way more than any other single language or any other pair or trio of languages combined. And all this is fine, but can easily lead to wrong conclusions because it's so hard to predict the future. In particular, the best technology does not always win. We all know that. We've all seen it. And programming languages that suck have become mainstream, not to mention any that begin with the letters B or C. And operating systems that okay, I won't mention anything here, but it happens over and over and over that the best technologies don't always win. Maybe it's political reasons, maybe it's marketing reasons, maybe it's being in the right place at the right time, maybe it's having a killer app, maybe there's a little bit of luck involved. And so I think looking at some empirical data is important. So again, this is Indeed.com, and the exact ups and downs in this graph you shouldn't pay too much attention to because remember, this is not a computer job site. So, both of these seem to have a little dip in here. Well, maybe that was because there was a big boom in hiring for teachers during that time. And this is the percentage of job postings on the site that contain this keyword. And Indeed.com is a little bit coy about exactly which job sites it samples from. You know it's Monster.com, you know it's Dice.com, you know it's Yahoo.jobs, but it doesn't tell you exactly all of them. And so you kind of get this feeling that it's biased towards North American and European jobs more than Indian jobs, and you get a feeling that's probably a little more biased to North American jobs and European jobs, but they don't exactly tell you. So it's hard to analyze this. So are these reflect worldwide job trends or North American job trends or European job trends? It's hard to exactly determine this because Indeed.com doesn't precisely tell you. But I think that the trends are useful. And so you see Java and C#, staying pretty strong as mainstream languages, but you don't see a particular closing of the gap. You don't see C# looking like it's catching up to Java in terms of job postings that ask for C# or Java programmers. So that's one way of looking at it, is how often does this word appear in job postings in either the subject or the listed keywords for the job. And again, these are rough data. So if it says, we want a barista at a coffee shop to serve Java, I don't know if it would list it in the keywords. It would have to be the keywords. Maybe this would match. Or maybe in the keywords it says, any programming language except Java. And so it matched. So exact numbers are not accurate here, but I think the rough trends are. And what you don't see is a particular closing of the gap. They seem to be pretty parallel in terms of job postings, probably biased towards North American job postings. Another way of looking at it is Google searches. How many people search on Google for the word, do a search that in the search somewhere contains the word Java? Now this is also not necessarily an accurate measure. You might say, well, you have to do a lot of Google searches on Java because it's hard to understand. But Clojure is so easy to understand and well documented, I don't have to Google for it. Right? Maybe that's true. There may be some truth to that. So again, this is only a rough trend, but you see even a substantially bigger difference between Java and C# and Google searches than you saw in the job postings in Indeed.com. But that's as many different indications as we can gather, I think, give us some useful information. How about versus C++? There, I think you see a clear trend that C++ is not dying. It's not dead, but it's tailing off a bit. And Java and C# and some of the more modern languages are moving in. And you see the same thing in the Google searches. Okay, Visual Basic. Of course, you would expect to see Visual Basic going down and C# going up because Microsoft is pushing C# in lieu of Visual Basic. And so this is not surprising, and this is not, against the wishes of Microsoft. And so they want C# to replace Visual Basic. So it's not surprising. But I'm trying to look at the most popular programming languages. Visual Basic is still up there in the most popular programming languages. And you see a very big difference in the Google searches. All right. So the three most popular programming languages in the world by JavaScript is a funny question because it's hard to do searches on JavaScript that don't also match Java by accident because of the way that, especially Indeed.com does it. And it used to be, okay, well, you need JavaScript, but you still need something on the server. So no matter how much JavaScript you have and how important Ajax becomes, the server has got to run something. But with HTML5, as you saw in Scott Davis's talk, maybe you can do the application directly in JavaScript, and you don't need server technology. You can communicate peer-to-peer. And so, putting JavaScript in here is a more difficult measure. But by most measures, Java, C#, C++, Perl, and Python are the 5 most widely used programming languages in the world. And so compared to Perl and Python, in job postings, again, these are rough, and they're probably biased towards North America, but it seems like Perl is dying off a little bit, and Python is going up to replace it, and that the scripting language of choice for applications is shifting from Perl to Python. That appears to be the trend, but it's not really strong. They're pretty comparable in terms of job postings, but not close to Java. And you see even a big difference in Google searches. You see a much wider difference between Java and Perl or Python than you do in the job postings. And of course, in the job postings, there could be more than one match. You're very likely to have keywords that say they want somebody who knows Java and Python, or Java and Scala, or Java and Ruby. All right, and then there's a whole bunch of others. And let me be controversial here on purpose. I don't care about those yet, because the market share is 0. Okay, that's not really true. I do care about those. And I was a Lisp programmer before Java existed. And so I've always missed functional programming and was annoyed that Java didn't support it. And so I have great sympathy for both Scala and Clojure. But they don't show up in the job postings. They're 0. So just because they're good, and just because programmers ought to be programming in Scala and Clojure, doesn't mean that they will be programming in Scala and Clojure. Maybe they will be, but we don't have any evidence for that yet. It doesn't mean I don't like them. I do like them. But looks pretty much like 0 to me. So Ruby, okay, Ruby and PHP are mainstream. Not up to the levels that C# was. And Python and Perl were in here, but mainstream. These are not mainstream. And so I don't care how good they are until they become mainstream. Which just annoyed 20% of the people in the audience who stormed out in protest. And you see about the same thing in the Google searches. You see, 0.1 on Scala and 0.000 for Clojure. They're both places basically at 0. And so they're not mainstream yet. Maybe they will be. Ruby was the same thing, 0.000, boom. So maybe, there'll be a battle between Scala and Clojure. We need a functional programming language. We need it. I hope they make it. But just the fact that some people like them and they're good does not mean they will become mainstream. And people have been saying for years they would, and they're still pretty much at 0. So we'll have to see. Okay, now HTML5 is obviously a very important issue. And the role of HTML5 in Java is not so clear to me. Now, Arun Gupta is giving a talk on the role of HTML5 in Java EE on Friday, which I'm going to make sure I get a front seat to attend. But we kind of have to see how that plays out, because that's an extremely important area and a little bit unclear where Java is going to fit in there. So HTML5, of course, is not as important in job postings yet, but it's a pretty strong upward trend, and it's a pretty safe prediction that it's one of the most important upcoming technologies, and that a language that doesn't play well with it will be hurt in the future. Okay, and then there's a few other organizations that claim to try to measure programming popularity. These guys have been around for a long time and are widely cited. I'm not sure I really believe them. Red is Java, green is C. They don't show up that way in any of the other measures, and so I think they're probably rating C a little too highly, or maybe they have an accidental match on keywords. But anyway, so they've got Java first, C second, Objective-C third. Okay, Objective-C is obviously important for iOS, but I don't think it's yet the third most widely used programming language in the world. Black is C++. This one is C#, PHP. I don't know. But anyway, they're widely cited. They've been around for a long time. They claim to have statistics behind their measures, just like all these other people claim to have statistics behind their measures. That's another way of measuring, but still you get Java at the top. This is another one, PYPL, popularity of programming languages. And they've got Java here. They've got PHP, of all things, second. They've got a whole bunch of ones about tied for third, which is C#, C++. Here's Ruby. I don't know, it's another way of measuring it. But almost anybody you can measure, whether you measure job postings or popularity or Google searches, you see the trend. You don't see anybody closing the gap with Java. So I think that there's lots of different. First of all, I don't know, and neither do you. We don't know what the net we know what the most popular programming language is now. It's Java. Okay, next week it will be 2. But next year, 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, I don't know. Nobody knows. It's hard to predict. But I think that there are some trends that we can look at that give you some indication. So on a 5-star rating, if this were movies, I would say based on the technical evolution of the language, I would give the prospects for Java about 3 stars. You know, pretty good, but not great. Based on management and legal issues, I would pan it and give it 2 stars because those recent trends in the last 2 years have not looked good for the future of Java. Based on the libraries that have been evolving in Java and how they've been progressing, I would give it 5 stars. I think possibly this is the single strongest area in Java. Based on the devices it runs on, you know, in some ways you could give it 5 stars in that Java is by far clearly and most, you know, unambiguously the language that's moving into the small devices most thoroughly. But it's also less clear how much these devices matter. PCs matter, computers matter, tablets matter, phones matter. Those all matter a lot. Which of these other devices really are that important? Okay, a lot of people use Kindles and Blu-ray players, but how many people write apps for them? So that's why I give it only 3 stars. But based on the empirical data, again, I think that's an extremely strong point that just the trends, not saying if this should be true, not saying if it ought to be true, not saying if Java is good, just purely measuring the trends in usage by programmers and by people hiring seems to show Java as the, you know, unchallenged king of the programming language pile. So if I had to, you know, pick a final rating for the future of Java, I'd give it 4 out of 5 stars. Pretty good prospects. But, you know, we don't really know. And so if I would conclude, I would say there are definitely some risks. The legal and management snafus of the past couple months, years, excuse me, you know, scare me. I don't like it. I don't like the fact that Oracle is headed by Larry Ellison. You know, fine for Oracle itself, but not for Java under that. I don't like the fact that Oracle is fighting with Google about Java. I don't care if they fight with Google about something else, but you know, about databases, go ahead and fight, but not about Java. They should be their friends. Those are the things they should settle behind closed doors, not so publicly. I don't like the fact that Apache dropped out of the Java community process. I will need Apache in there. I want Apache in there. Apache is a super important player. I beg Apache to come back, and I want Oracle to change its ways of the Java community process so that Apache will be satisfied. So there are some risks, but I think Java still looks moderately strong. And furthermore, I would say that not only does Java look moderately strong, but no other programming language looks even remotely close to as strong. So everybody else would have a much lower rating. And I would suggest that 5 years from now, the language people will be talking about as threatening Java was not on my slides. Unless it was Scala and Clojure. But we don't know yet because the trend hasn't gone up yet. But I would argue that probably the biggest threat 5 years from now to Java's dominance as a programming language is one of the ones that's not one of the top 6 now. Because it doesn't seem like any of the top 6 are closing the gap. But things change so rapidly. Come back and ask me again in 2 years and see if I say the same thing. All right, I wanted to save 5 to 8 minutes, 5 minutes for questions, so let me take a few questions. Better choice than Java for for learning programming, because I think that Java has kind of too much baggage. You know, if you're in a computer science curriculum, what do you want to learn? You want to learn data structures. You want to learn algorithms. You want to learn, you know, strategies. You want to learn efficiency. And the more quickly you can get a program written and going, the better. And so I think Python is a good choice for entry-level computer science classes and a better choice than Java. I'm on the program committee in the part-time computer science department at Johns Hopkins, which is East Coast university in the US. And I pushed hard for Java to become the main programming language years and years ago when everyone was using C++, and it seemed radical at the time. And now, even though I'm a Java programmer myself by profession, I've been pushing for Python to be more widely used. And so I think Python is a good choice for that, and ought to be. Yes, sir? Well, I think that it depends on, were you talking about the core language or the libraries? I think the libraries were increasing and proliferating and getting better throughout the time. But I think that the core Java Standard Edition, I'm not talking about the enterprise libraries, I think that Java 6 and Java 7 were boring and didn't include very many important new features, whereas Java 8, many extremely important new features, the most important release since Java 5 in my opinion. So just looking at the features in Java 8 versus 6 and 7 is what I base that on. Maybe two more questions, and I'll take in as many more as you want. I guess we'll have to take them outside.
So the Java versus JavaScript.
Yeah, this is a difficult question to measure because it's hard to get accurate statistics because sometimes when you look for JavaScript, it also returns Java on some of the searches. Historically, the answer has been, well, you use JavaScript in the browser and you use Java on the server. And that's been a very good combination. And so people, all the Java library frameworks use JavaScript on the browser, or jQuery on the browser, it just uses JavaScript, and Java on the server. So I don't know about JavaScript. Native HTML5 applications, I think, with both video, as Scott Davis was talking about, and HTML5 Canvas, will increase the role of JavaScript. So I think JavaScript will also be up there as an important language, which is kind of funny because when JavaScript was designed, it was designed for small applications, not for big applications. And so we'll have to see. But I think JavaScript, the importance and role of JavaScript will only increase.
So is Closure here?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So is Closure, the language Closure is going to be part of Java 8, or kind of Java 8 is trying to replace Closure? Or?
No, okay, Closure is an entirely separate language, not related to Java, that runs on the Java virtual machine, like Scala. So Closure is not Clojure the language with a J.
Yeah.
Clojure the language with a J is not related in any way to Java 8. Entirely separate thing.
Okay, but the feature like passing function as an argument, that comes from the Closure language, right? It's not
passing functions as an argument comes from functional programming languages with a long history, starting in the 1960s with Lisp. So this idea of passing functions around is not